7 million years of human history may end in a couple of moments, but not because of a nuclear war or an alien invasion, and not even because of a collision with a meteorite. Mankind is on the verge of destruction. It can fall at the hands of its creators, namely at the hands of the gods themselves. Every 1,000 years, the gods gather in the council chamber of Valhalla to decide the fate of mankind. The gods propose to destroy humanity, since it does not develop, but only degrades and pollutes this world. And at the moment of sentencing, a Valkyrie named Brunhilde suddenly enters. She offered to arrange a Ragnarok, the last battle between gods and people, where 13 people will fight against 13 gods in a one-on-one duel, and the side that wins 7 fights first will win. However, the gods rejected her idea of fights, and then Brunhilde called the gods cowards, which greatly offended her ego, and therefore Zeus was interested in this situation, and he agreed on Ragnarok. And he also gave Brunhilde the right to choose the people who will represent humanity, and these must be the strongest 13 people this world could ever see. After a while in the arena of Valhalla, Heimdall, the guardian of the apocalypse, announces the start of Ragnarok. And he also says that according to the rules of this game, the one who destroyed the enemy wins. And in the first battle, the long-haired, green-eyed berserker of thunder will act from the gods. The god Thor, along with his hammer Mjolnir, and the strongest, most ferocious thug with stickers on his body, the greatest Chinese general Lu Bu, will be the first to speak for the people. And all his warriors and commanders of the Three Kingdoms era came to support him, where there were the drunkard Jin Fi, Liu Bei, and the strongest commander Guan Yu, who is considered the strongest commander. However, even he believes that he is inferior to Il Bu in terms of strength. After that, Heimdall Blue announced the start of the first duel. However, none of the fighters even moved from their place, since both of them are not afraid of the enemy's attacks. And it also turns out that they are similar to each other in that they end all their battles with one blow. But then, Il Bu summoned weapons from the sky, and they began to fight. He attacked first, but Thor parried his blow without any problems, and Liu Bu managed to push the god back a couple of meters. However, in response, Thor, using only crumbs of his strength, pushed Liu Bu back a couple of tens of meters. After that, they began to fight, and it turned out that now they are equal in strength. And Thor, realizing that he had met a worthy opponent, decided, like God, to show him respect and use more of his strength. But before continuing the battle, we were shown a story from ancient Asgard, which was surrounded by high walls that protected the inhabitants from the ice giants of Jotunheim. But one day, a real attack of the Titans began, where 66 giants attacked the city at once, and this happened for the first time. In this connection, the local god of war Tyr and the guardians came to the defense of the city. However, they were all killed, and the giants began to devour the inhabitants of Asgard. And since there was no local Eren here, Thor appeared, and opening the doors of the palace, he killed all the Titans with his super attack. And since then, his death attack is called Lightning Quality Strike. However, even this battle then could not dispel Thor's boredom. After we were returned to the arena, where Thor attacked Liu Bu with his lightning attack, and from this blow, even Aphrodite's chest was in shock. However, Liu Bu withstood the blow, and moreover was even able to injure Thor in response, which caused shock to everyone who watched this fight. After that, Liu Bu and Thor realized that they were very similar, and if they lived in the same era or belonged to the same species, they would most likely be friends. In the meantime, only boredom unites them. In this connection, we were also shown the past of Liu Bu, where he was born in the province of China, and since childhood, he, realizing his strength, was looking for an opponent who would be stronger than him. And so he quickly crossed the continent, and his name quickly gained popularity. But even killing entire armies alone and gaining many followers, for as many as 30 years of wandering, Liu Bu could not find a warrior stronger than him. And out of his boredom, Il Bu surrendered to the emperor. After all, realizing that he is the strongest, he lost the meaning of life. And it turns out that his own boredom took his life. Further, we were returned to the arena, where now Liu Bu realized that he had finally met a worthy opponent. And he began to enjoy this fight. And the gods noticed that Liu Bu was able to repel Thor's blow, and his weapon did not break, although no human weapon can withstand the blow of a divine weapon. And Zeus realized that these were the tricks of Brunhilde. And it turned out that before the start of Ragnarok, During the search for applicants, she clearly understood that a man cannot defeat a god without help, and in order to catch up with it, a person must be endowed with divine weapons. And for this, Brunhild called on all her Valkyrie sisters. This is the first time that all 13 sisters have come together. However, only Randgrid, the fourth of the Valkyries, has so far appeared before Geir and Brunhild. Brunhild asked her if she knew about the sacred objects and weapons of Thor, and the fourth said that Thor uses Jarngreit gloves, which can repel any attack. They also protect him from the power of Mjolnir, and these are the strongest items of Thor. And it turns out that in order to defeat him, you need to defeat his objects. After that, Brunhild asked her sister if she was ready to give her life for the salvation of mankind, and she agreed. And then, before the start of the battle, Randgrid turned into a halberd and became the weapon of Lu Bu. This technique is called Velend, where the Valkyrie turns into a weapon and thereby gives a person the weapon of a god. And since Thor has excellent protection, Randgrid, whose name translates as Shield Destroyer, was chosen to fight him. Further, we were also explained that Mjolnir is the strongest weapon that can even destroy the continent, and whoever can lift this hammer will be destroyed by its lava-like heat. Therefore, Jarngreit gloves flaunt on Thor's hands to protect his hands. And right after this blow, Ulbu was able to destroy Thor's glove with his blow, and the hammer fell to the ground. After that, Herms already explained to us that the Valkyries were created to accompany the souls of people to heaven, where they became warriors of the gods and stood up to protect heaven. And the Valkyries endowed them with the power of the gods, turning them into weapons, and this power was called Velend. And now the Valkyries also collect souls and grant them the power with which they fight the gods. This is the essence of Ragnarok. Well, Zeus then agreed to this since he liked everything that happened. And also he immediately noticed Brunhild, who immediately made it clear to him that she was not excited because of the old people. Well, in parallel with this, Mjolnir began to overheat and melt everything around. And since Thor was left with only one glove, there is a possibility that he will not be able to lift the hammer. And the hammer already further began to pulsate, and Thor called it the awakening of the hammer. And already further, Zeus explains to us that everyone incorrectly interprets the role of Thor's gloves. After all, they are needed not to protect his hands from the hammer, but they are needed to restrain the true power of Thor so that he does not destroy the hammer with his power before his final awakening. Further, after these events, Thor raised his pulsating object and asked Lu Bu not to die immediately and let him enjoy this fight. At the same time, Brunhild received an SMS on her phone with information about the participants in the Ragnarok, and also this information about the battles reached the gods. After that, we were again returned to the battlefield, where for the first time in history, everyone saw the true power of Thor, and he threw his hammer at Ulbu, and he never misses with this attack. But suddenly, unexpectedly, Lu Bu, like Neo from the Matrix, manages to dodge, and he immediately begins to counterattack, but Mjolnir manages to return to Thor, and it turns out that he was throwing him so that he would pick up speed and not try to hit Lu Bu. He simply picked up speed so that he could hit Lu Bu with all his might, but Ulbu was able to withstand this blow. However, his legs were broken due to the force of the blow. But suddenly his horse, nicknamed the Red Hare, appeared. Lu Bu jumped on him, and we were shown his memories from childhood, where lightning struck a huge tree before his eyes. And instead of being scared, on the contrary, he enjoyed it. He also thought that someone very cool lives in the sky. Further, we were again returned to the battle, where Ulbu asked the horse if he was ready to die for the victory. And having received the go-ahead to do so, Ulbu grabbed the very edge of the halberd to use his strongest blow, the Sky Eater. With this blow, he once divided the sky in half, and now he finally got the chance to use this blow for its intended purpose. Well, Thor, in turn, decided to use his strongest blow of the Hammer of Thor, and the result was just an unreal clash of power, from which Lu Bu lost his limbs, and Randgrid fell lifeless. But even in this state, Ulbu decided to continue the fight using his teeth. However, Thor decapitated him with his next attack, and as a result, he won this battle in 16 minutes 18 seconds. And absolutely everyone enjoyed watching this confrontation. After that, the military leaders who watched the battle drank to their general, who died with a smile on his face. But Thor, leaving the arena, was again sad, since he did not have time to enjoy the fight. But suddenly further, a red hare appeared, riding on which was General Chun Gong's assistant with a whole army. They shouted that they were Lu Bu's warriors and that they would kill someone anyway. Well, Thor, in honor of the general, decided to accept this battle and call it an offering to his already friend Lu Bu. And he killed them all. Well, at the same time, Geir, who did not understand, asked Brunhild what would happen to Lu Bu and Randgrid now, to which the first replied that now they can't even be resurrected, since their souls are no more. Geir, on the other hand, was shocked that Brunhild did not mourn for her sister in the slightest. But the first explained that now their lives are needed to defeat the gods and save humanity. Therefore, she is ready for anything to win. Then we were shown the Akashic records. There Brunhild chose the second representative of the people, and she decided to bet on man's hatred of the gods. In this connection, we were further returned to the restored arena, where the first of the men and the father of all mankind, Adam, will act for people. And against him, in theory, the Indian god Shiva should fight. However, on the way to the arena, he was intercepted by Zeus, to whom Shiva with great reluctance conceded this battle. And now we are planning to fight the father of all people and the father of all gods, on the basis of which Zeus recommended Adam to summon weapons in the same way as Lu Bu. Zeus thinks this guy won't last even a minute without him. And further, a Pegasus appeared, on which sat the seventh of the Valkyries, Regingave, the rider of the storm. Adam tasted her forbidden fruit, their hearts joined, and she turned into brass knuckles. Afterward, Adam called Zeus a dude and asked where his weapon was. But God replied that he would fight with his bare hands, and Zeus immediately attacked him at the speed of light, but the first one was able to dodge. After that, Zeus began to speed up his attacks, but he could not hit Adam. But Adam counterattacked in response to this and also began to accelerate with each attack, and he beat Zeus so well with his blows. He also started copying his divine attacks, and from this even Ares, the god of war, his nuts trembled. But Zeus himself just enjoyed it. And Brunhild explained to us that since the gods made Adam in their own image, it means that he is their copy, and therefore he can copy the methods of the gods. This is called divine reflection. After that, Zeus again attacked Adam with lightning speed, but he dodged and with his slender, prehistoric Sharingan copied his techniques and hit him, breaking his neck. But Zeus, in response, decided to use the technique that he felt on himself during the battle with his father Kronos. This was his final move, a fist ahead of time, violating all the laws of time. However, Adam was able to dodge again and, copying the blow, counterattacked. And Zeus was on Earth. Further, Ares, the god of war, joined in the explanation. He clarified that the usual moves like the meteor strike and the divine low kick were not even visible to the average gods. But now even Ares himself could not see the blow ahead of time. And this proves that Adam is at an unrealistically high level. In this connection, we were shown the past, where once in paradise Adam and Eve lived in harmony with nature, until one day the serpent decided to take possession of Eve. But she was faithful to her husband, and the snake only got an apple in the face. And after that, the snake held a grudge. And before the gods, he is everything, as if Eve had bitten the forbidden fruit. And since it was the gods who judged her, they found her guilty, and she will be expelled from paradise. However, further, Adam entered the hall with a whole basket of apples, which he defiantly bit and spat out along the way, as they were sour. He approached Eva and said that since she was being kicked out, he would go with her. And the snake at that moment was seething with anger, and he began to turn into a monster to kill Adam. But he repelled his attacks without any problems, and as a result, killed the snake. And after that, Adam and Eve went to Earth to create their paradise where they lived happily ever after. Next, we were returned to the battlefield, where Heimdall was about to declare Adam the winner. But suddenly Zeus got to his feet and put his head back. Further, he said that he did not see in Adam that there was hatred for the gods. He wonders what he is fighting for now. And the father of all people replied that he was now fighting to protect his children. In this regard, Zeus further began to transform into his final form called Adamas. His muscles were very tense, and he seemed to be barely holding them back, and everyone felt a sharp jump in his strength. Adam, realizing that he smelled fried, for the first time stood up in a defensive stance, after which Zeus attacked him with the strongest blow of divine truth. However, Adam was able to repel this attack as well, and he also parried a blow with his left hand. Further, he simply began to beat Zeus, But Adam himself suddenly began to bleed. And this is most likely his body overheating and bursting at the seams, because using the reflection techniques, his system is already at the limit. Zeus was also already at the limit, but still they continued the fight in the same rhythm. And now this battle of endurance. And as a result, Adam was the first to lose ground, and Zeus began to beat him, and he lost his sight. However, until the very end, he was determined to win, and he missed blows to grab Zeus. And they began to exchange blows, where Zeus could not stand the first. But it turned out that he did not lose, since by this time, Adam was already dead. And it happened a couple of minutes before, and he struck blows with muscle memory. In this regard, Zeus recognized the power of Adam, and said that he was truly unique. And basically, if this wasn't an endurance battle, Adam would have won. And although now people were in a little shock from losing in 2 rounds, they still held on, because Adam left behind a great legacy. Next, we were shown Geir, who ran to Brunhild to ask why Raging Gave died. Christ, the second of the Valkyries, began to calm her there. She explained that during the application of Veland, a person and a Valkyrie become one, and this is not just a transformation into a weapon. In other words, they share their fate together, they fight together and die together. And Christ tried to comfort her sister with her breasts. Well, the second one herself was furious that her sisters were dying from the gods, and she yearned for revenge. And in Christ herself there are 2 forces at once, and her name means trembling with fear and burning with anger. Well, Brunhild at that time seized her grief with food, because Zeus defeated her trump card. In the 3rd duel, there will be a fight against Poseidon. He is the elder brother of Zeus and one of the best fighters from the gods. In this regard, the first one first silenced Geir, and after that she began to think about whom she should put against the now sea Zeus. And suddenly the Japanese Sasaki Kojiro came to her unexpectedly. He said that he would go out one-on-one with Poseidon. However, the Valkyries, judging him by his appearance, thought that this was just an old man's joke. But further, he demonstrated his skills on the falling milk. And Brunhild saw in him the features of a true master. He also explained that 400 years have passed since his death, and all this time, he never stopped training his blade skills. His Ganryu evolution is not over yet, as his golden age of Kojiro has now arrived, and as a result, they gave him the green light to fight, and Christ decided to become his weapon. Next, we were transferred to the arena, which was specially modified for the most formidable god, Poseidon, who instills fear even in the gods. Well, his opponent will be the greatest loser in history, Sasaki Kojiro, who is underestimated by everyone. After all, during his lifetime he was far from an ideal swordsman. There is not a single victory on his account. However, now that his katana touched the water, he was able to still the water. And all the greatest swordsmen of all time saw that Sasaki was able to achieve the form that all swordsmen aspire to. And by doing so, they recognized that he had truly become the greatest swordsman in history. Then Heimdall announced the start of the duel. Sasaki immediately attacked Poseidon, who ran him through with his trident. But it turned out that Sasaki did all this only in his head. And so far, in all 18 attempts, he was killed by Poseidon. And in parallel with this, Brunhild told us and the younger Valkyrie that once upon a time there were 13 gods of Olympus, until one of them was killed by Poseidon. This god was called Adamas. He was born the ruler of the cosmos, and he was the second most senior god after Hades. And the third was Poseidon. And when Adamas learned that Zeus, the youngest of all, ascended the throne, having defeated the Titans and the father of Kronos, Adamas said that he would not allow him to be on the throne. After all, the elders should not serve the younger ones, and he rebelled. He freed the imprisoned Titans in Tartarus, and he also subjugated the terrible beast Siphon and set out with his army. And then many of the gods went over to his side, and also he came to Poseidon and invited him to join him. But he called him pathetic and said that he would not help him. After all, the gods do not look for enemies, do not weave conspiracies, and do not ask. He said that the gods are originally ideal, and in his opinion, Adamas defiled this concept. But the second did not like the answer, and he decided to kill him. However, when he attacked Poseidon, he, looking into his eyes, cut him. And the witness of all this was Hermes, who, in addition to all this, was also a traitor. And after these events, history was rewritten. Next, we were returned to the battlefield again, where after thinking about how to kill a god who does not even look at him, Sasaki said that he did not know what to do, but he doesn't want to die. And they began to show us the life story of the great loser. It turns out that Kojiro Sasaki has never won a single fight in his life. He has always been a good swordsman. However, in order not to get hit by opponents who were stronger, he often gave up. After all, injuries could harm his career as a swordsman, but Sasaki always worked through all the fights in his head. And one day, thinking about how to kill Kagemasu, he, seeing a hare, began to repeat after him. And thus he began to improve his skills by training him in the wild, and he literally learned from wild animals. His talent was that when he lost a fight, he saw his way to victory more and more clearly, making work on his mistakes. He also ate a lot of meat to build muscle, and after 6 months he pumped his body. But in order to defeat Kagemasu, he imagined the battle with him 146 times in his head. And with just one move, he showed Kagemasu that he could defeat him. And over the next few years, Kojiro, receiving blows from the strongest swordsman, worked on his mistakes in his head and thus virtually defeated them. He lost to be the greatest, and so the world's greatest loser was born. Next, we were returned to the arena, where Kojiro realized that he could not lose. After all, so many parts of the great masters were invested in his skill that he simply cannot devalue it all. In this connection, he attacked Poseidon, and the blow was from behind the head. But Poseidon dodged this attack without any problems. However, Kojiro, using all his strength and skill, was able to stop the sword and flip it over to attack back, and he managed to cut Poseidon's hair. After that, Poseidon himself went on the attack and began to sprinkle Sasaki with a flurry of attacks. But it turned out that the swordsman remembered the movements of the god with his brain supercomputer and was able to evade everyone. It was the technique of 1,000 images. But then, Poseidon again attacked with lightning speed, which is why Kojiro could not even react. Also, the god called him a loser, and this was the first time he spoke to a man. However, Kojiro smiled and got to his feet, and asked why Poseidon was so happy. He answered because he is a god, and he is perfect in everything. But Kojiro called him wretched, and the god bombarded him with attacks again. And in the end, the god destroyed Kojiro's sword, but the swordsman refused to give up, because now it will not be the same as it was with Musashi. And we were shown a flashback from 1612, where there was a legendary battle between Musashi and Kojiro. And then he, realizing that Musashi is an incredibly strong opponent, and since at that time Kojiro was unable to defeat him, so as not to die, he surrendered. But then he changed his mind, and they decided to fight to the death. Their fight lasted only a few minutes, but even in those minutes they both managed to enjoy themselves. And then Kojiro left the same cross on Musashi's forehead. Well, he himself was then chopped with a cross. And for both swordsmen, this fight was the most difficult and happiest in their lives. Further, we were returned to the arena again, where Kojiro asked the god if he practiced his skills day and night before sunrise, and if his eyes filled with tears of gratitude for the opponents who made him stronger. And of course, that was a rhetorical question. After that, Kojiro raised the pieces of the sword, and they began to glow. He used double Wayland and had 2 swords. This was a feature of Christ, because this is the only Valkyrie in which 2 forces coexist. Next, they continued the fight, where now with 2 swords, Sasaki began to move like Musashi. He also began to use the different styles of the best masters he fought, and he managed to scratch the face of Poseidon, and he also wounded him in different places. And as a result, after several such attacks, Poseidon was all covered with wounds, and a gap appeared in the victory of the swordsman. But Poseidon only in response began to whistle, looking at his own blood. After that, he decided to fight in earnest, and with the next move, he wounded Kojiro in the shoulder. And it was like a storm of blows. And Kojiro went down again, and he even managed to break through the bottom. However, having heard the voices of those who gave him experience, he, having reached the bottom, pushed off from it. And he further began to predict everything, from the movements of the enemy to the breath of the wind. And now, using everything around, Kojiro began to calculate the blows of Poseidon. After which he cut off the hand of the god with the next attack, but Poseidon continued to fight desperately. However, Kojiro's next attack cut Poseidon's body apart, and it turns out that the great loser defeated the great god. Thus, he caused a whole storm of emotions among the gods. After that, a path appeared in front of Kojiro, But he began to fall, and Christ picked him up. And the swordsman thanked her for her work. But Brunhild, although she was glad of the victory, but for her this is just one victory out of 7. After that, we were shown the temple of Zeus, where Ares, Hermes, Shiva, and Loki came, who began to make claims to Zeus because he was behaving stupidly. But Zeus replied that the man was stronger than his older brother Poseidon, and he said that they need to understand that people are strong, and this Valkyrie Brunhild really decided to defeat all the gods. And this means that they too must take this battle seriously, and Shiva said that he would fight next. But Zeus replied that not yet, because the Greek gods want revenge. Well, at the same time, Gyr saw Hermes communicating with Brunhild, and after we were transferred to the arena, which was transformed into London of the 19th century. It was the request of a fighter of mankind, and the fighter from the side of the gods successfully accepted this condition. And this will be the first ever street fight between God and man. The most famous killer in the history of mankind, Jack the Ripper, will act for people. He is also the most mysterious killer in history. And on the side of the gods will be the legendary hero, the demigod half-man Hercules. And then there is a clear battle between good and evil, where Jack the Ripper, as a representative of the people, will fight against Hercules, the representative of the gods. But before that, we were shown a fragment where, before all this, Brunhild and little Gyr met Hercules, who was going to the arena. It turns out that the Valkyries communicate very well with Hercules because he became a god in order to protect people. And they were shocked that it was Hercules who would come out next against the people, in connection with which Brunhild wished him good luck. Also on the way, Loki approached Hercules for a conversation. It became clear from him that Hercules wants to win in his battle in order to take advantage of this moment and ask the gods to have mercy on people. After that, we were again returned to the Valkyries, where the first one told her sister that the one who she hates with all her heart will act for the side of the people in this battle, because he is a real scum of society. She talked about the maniac and sadist Jack the Ripper. We were transferred to the arena where Heimdall introduced the participants. And it turned out that almost all the audience, even people, rooted for Hercules since Jack was a killer. And right before the fight, we were shown the story of his childhood, where he grew up in the most terrible conditions. And everything that the gods awarded him was an eye that could see the emotions of people. He also had a mother, Mary, who entertained people for money. However, for all his modest life, Jack was happy because he was surrounded by motherly love. In addition, he loved to read. But later it turned out that this was just the surface of the iceberg, because his mother had 5 abortions before Jack appeared. But she left Jack herself because she loved one guy named Jack Smith, who promised to return to her, but having become popular, left her. The mother, realizing the betrayal, began to tell Jack that she had given birth to him in vain, because if that guy Smith did not come to her anymore, then she no longer needed her son. And she casually hit him on the temple with a book. And then our Jack realized that his mother did not love him at all, but the guy who left her. And the color of his mother's love and emotions, which he always loved, had nothing to do with him. And Jack decided to rid her of this color. And he saw the color of fear, which he considered insanely beautiful. The mother, in response, wanted to pounce on the guy, but he destroyed her with one movement of his hand. And then he took a book of Shakespeare, came to his alleged father, that same Jack Smith, and after reading him a few lines from Shakespeare, he destroyed it. Well, then the guy got lost on the streets of London and became the most elusive, cruelest maniac in the history of mankind. After all, even Sherlock Holmes, about whom Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, was invented due to the fact that the writer devoted his whole life to the capture of Jack the Ripper. After that, we were returned to the battlefield, where Heimdall announced the start of the duel. Hercules immediately offered the maniac to surrender, because in this case he promises that he will save his soul from complete destruction. However, Jack refused the offer and only thanked Hercules for agreeing to fight on his territory. After that, he took out a giant scissors and called them his Wayland, with which he would fight. Hercules, in response, said that in this case he would fight against him with full strength. However, immediately after these words, Jack suddenly ran away and disappeared into an alley. Hercules ran after him, and it turned out that Jack was in a hurry so as not to miss the tea time, where he also offered tea to Hercules. But God decided to end this fight with one blow. However, it turned out that Jack had prepared a trap for him, which was made from ordinary human weapons that cannot injure Hercules' body. It turned out that Jack was just checking the legends about the power of this god. After that, Hercules again reduced the distance and already wanted to destroy Jack, but he fired a weapon at the roof and began to run away. Hercules caught up with him in a jump and broke his giant scissors. But it turned out that Jack was lying, because his Veland was not scissors, but a bag with an infinite number of knives, with which he further mutilated the body of Hercules, because they were turned into divine weapons. However, Hercules has an unshakable spirit. He only pulled out the knives and continued to walk towards Jack, repelling his knife attacks. In this connection, he reduced the distance for the strike, but Jack parried his attack with an umbrella. Next, Hercules decided to use the power of the exodus of his 12 labors, where he immediately began to cover himself with tattoos. And he also used the power of the first feet, the power of the Nemean lion. Using some kind of lion's chidori, he threw Jack into the building. Everyone thought that Jack had lost, but Brunhild said that this was only the beginning of their battle. Then Jack got to his feet and said that he liked it and set his own shoulder. And right after, he reads quotes from Shakespeare and announced the beginning of the second act of their battle, and therefore he took out a giant penknife. But before that, we were shown the story of Ares about the tattoos of Hercules, where it turned out that the price of this power and tattoos is the life of Hercules himself, because if he does not have time to destroy Jack before the moment his body is completely covered with a tattoo, the body and soul of Hercules himself will be destroyed. Therefore, this technique is also called the Exodus of Hercules. But Ares believes that Hercules will win, because his real power is not in gigantic strength, but in invincible will. In this regard, we were shown his story from ancient Thebes, where then Hercules was an ordinary boy, helping others in any way he could. His name then was Alcid. He always helped those who were on the side of the righteous. And since Alcides then had a weak body and was periodically bullied by those who are stronger and dumber, Alcides began to train his body hard. To do this, he always chose the most difficult path until there was not a single one left who would be stronger and could mock him. There was also a statue of Zeus in their city, where, according to legend, ambrosia is located, the red liquid of Zeus himself, which can give a true hero great strength, but can destroy a false hero. But Hercules, as a real hero, decided to pump his strength with real actions and exploits. We were shown how at the same time the next council of Valhalla was held, where 74% of the gods were for the destruction of people because of their greed and disrespect of some people from the city of Thebes. And since this was Ares' territory, he said he would deal with these people himself. It is clear that then most of the people were righteous and just prayed to the gods and were not to blame for anything. Therefore, when Ares with the strongest army of the gods approached the walls of the city, Alcid stood in their way, who was against them destroying people, because they, in turn, worship the gods, but the gods selfishly erase entire cities because of the misdeeds of some people. Alcides tried to stop Ares, but he stopped the guy with his heel. Ares, on the other hand, just liked the determination of Alcides, and he offered him to bend the knee, and then he would spare him. But he again repeated that the gods unfairly judge people. In this regard, he is ready to give his life to protect innocent righteous people. On the basis of which he took out the very red liquid of Zeus from his pocket, and he drank it completely. Ares, knowing her properties, thought that the guy was no longer a tenant. However, Alcides' hair turned white, and he began to turn into the ancient mob Psycho 100, and he received a power equal to Ares, since Alcides was a real hero in his soul. He single-handedly began the battle with Ares and his strongest army, which he defeated as a result, and they were left with Ares to fight one-on-one. Then Zeus himself appeared, who stopped this fight. He also said that he would make Alcides a god, so that he could protect people from heaven and not create problems on earth. In return, only Alcid asked the gods to promise that they would not touch people. And Zeus gave the go-ahead for this, but sent that Alcid should make sure that people no longer deviate from the righteous path. Then there was the coronation of Alcides, and he became a god, the son of Zeus himself. He was given a new name in honor of the wife of Zeus, Hera, and he became known to everyone as Hercules. Well, Ares is now proud that after the fight with him, Hercules became a god and his best friend. After that, we were returned to the battlefield, where Jack continued to throw various types of knives from Hercules from the bag. He also pulled strings around the entire perimeter, with which he pulled knives and fired at the god from all sides. Knives fought from all sides and Hercules began to turn into a hedgehog. In response to this, he decided to use the power of the 6 feet, the Stymphalian birds, and he redirected the knives back to Jack with the wind, and he was able to fight off most of the knives, but received several wounds. And Hercules finally noticed his unreasonably strong eye, which contained an emotional Uzumaki Sharingan. Then Jack said that now, for the first time in his life, he would destroy a real god. Also, Jack once again reminded that he considers the color of the emotion of fear the most beautiful, and he wants to see the fear of Hercules. But he replied that there was no fear in him, and the only thing that could unbalance him was the reign of injustice. After that, Hercules attacked again, and Jack began to run away from him, climbing onto Big Ben, which Hercules then cut down, and Jack hung on the arrows. Hercules used his 7th labor where he defeated the Cretan bull. Jack, in response, threw a watch dial at him, with which, to everyone's surprise, he was able to injure the hand of the uncomprehending Hercules. It turned out that Jack had been lying about his Wayland all this time, since his real Wayland is gloves, with which, when he touches something, he turns it into a divine weapon. In this connection, we were shown the moment when Brunhild and Geir came to Hlek, the 11th of the Valkyries, who was sharply opposed to being a maniac Wayland. However, in the end, Jack himself appeared there and, grabbing her by the throat, forcibly connected their souls, and Hlek turned into gloves. Brunhild was sure that it was her strength that would help win this battle. Well, in the meantime, Jack on the battlefield, after the story about his Wayland, said that now the whole of London will be his divine weapon. It was also explained to us that due to the lack of love, Jack became what he is now. Hearing all this, Hercules rewound his hand and said that Jack had already lost. And God began to list all the things that made Jack so disappointed. And although Hercules considers people weak due to the fact that they are most often ruled by emotions, despite all this, he loves people, and he promised to save Jack from his emotional dependence. In this regard, he called on Cerberus from his 12th labor, which bit him on the hands and body, and Hercules changed completely. Well, Zeus explained to us that now everything will depend on the time of the battle, because in this form Hercules is unimaginably strong. However, over time, if he does not have time to defeat Jack, then Cerberus will completely absorb Hercules. In this connection, the god began to attack, but Jack dodged and began to recline everyone in a row in response. But the god broke all his items and used the blow of the great hero. But Jack dodged again and tried to climb the building. But Hercules jumped towards him, and with a blow stuck him into the ground, where Jack was impaled on the fence. Hercules said that Jack could not hide anywhere in this city, but Jack corrected him and reminded him that everything around him was his weapon. It turns out that when he was falling, he cut the Big Ben building and turned it into a weapon, and it began to fall right on Hercules. Jack, to distract him, attacked him and, pushing off him, flew through the building. And as a result, it fell entirely on Hercules and crushed him. However, it turned out that he was able to survive this collapse. The audience was glad that he was alive, and Jack, seeing this, began to turn into the Joker because he even more wanted to recolor the color of Hercules' emotions. He decided to arrange a grand finale, and therefore he made a sword and shield out of the wreckage. And they continued to fight in close combat, where Hercules, although he was with one arm, he easily threw Jack into the building, after he decided to finish him off, but Jack dodged. And it turns out that all this time he wanted to punch Hercules in the head, but he did not manage to do it. Then Jack stood up and, heading towards Hercules, began to sing songs and recite quotations. After they hit each other at the same time, where Jack was the first, and he punched Hercules with his own hands. It turned out that he soaked them with his red liquid, turning it into a divine weapon. In this connection, Hercules realized that he lost and reminded Jack that he does not feel fear now, because the color of his soul has not changed, and all this is because of love for people. Then he suddenly hugged Jack, but he smiled in response and called him stubborn. Hercules also told Brunhild that now everything is in her hands, after which Hercules disappeared, and already further Hlek, leaving Wayland, asked Jack how he feels after the destruction of the god. He replied that it was not clear, because before that he had not yet felt this feeling. After that, Hlek flew away and asked Jack to go to the infirmary as soon as possible. Our Wind picked up his hat and began to leave the arena, and he also thought along the way that if he could use his one wish, he would wish to meet his love. However, Already at the exit from the arena, they began to throw stones at him for destroying the universal favorite, Hercules. And only Shakespeare, who was watching this, revealed the secret of Jack's behavior. He said that one should not look away from the fact that the truth, where the beautiful can turn into an abomination, and beauty can be hidden in an abomination. And this is the essence of man. Next, we were transferred to the Valkyries, where Geir began to make claims to Brunhild for the fact that Jack destroyed their beloved Hercules. But the first one only said that Valkyrie stands for chooser of the slain. Then, out of anger, she hurt her hand on the door in the altar room. There, in honor of the memory of Hercules, she set up an altar for him next to the dead Adam and Lu Bu. And she began to shed tears, promising that after the end of Ragnarok, she promised to join them. And at the same time, Ares and other gods were furious because of the departure from the life of Hercules and his loss. Well, Loki, like Detective Sherlock Holmes, put everything on the shelves how brilliantly Jack deceived Hercules in battle. And Zeus angrily destroyed the place where they watched the fights. And now they are all waiting for further actions of people. After that, we were shown the waiting room for the champions of mankind, the corridor of the arena, where Soji Okita and Azami Kondo were talking, who were waiting for their fights with the gods. And right after, we were shown Loki, who came to talk to the Buddha to ask him if he helped the Valkyries learn to connect souls and use Wayland with the help of the Buddha's controlled thing from his spiritual realm. In other words, is it not he who gave the Valkyries the opportunity, risking their lives, to share fate with people and fight against the gods? The Buddha replied that the question was too long, and he listened to almost everything deftly. Then Loki already directly asked if the Buddha was a traitor among the gods. But he boldly replied that even if so, then what? And Loki explained that in this case, Loki would become a corpse. After that, the 7 heavenly arbiters of justice appeared. They are also the 7 gods of happiness. 7 decided to show the Buddha for betrayal. Loki also joined them, and they decided to beat the Buddha with 8. In response to this, the Buddha bit through his lollipop and pierced Ebisu's hand with a stick from it. And then Sasaki Kojiro appeared, who was unhappy that such an unequal duel was taking place here, and he decided to help the Buddha. After that, Tsuji Okita and Azami Kondo joined with Zabuza's sword. They also decided to join this fight, because they cannot miss such fun. Ebisu decided to attack first, but he couldn't even hit the Buddha. Then Loki joined in and summoned his weapon, and Soji Okita started the fight with him. But everyone was stopped by the appearance of Odin and Zeus, where further the crows of Odin began to speak and accuse all the participants. However, people and gods considered them too cute to obey them. And then Odin turned on, who with one word, and his aura cooled the ardor of everyone. In this connection, Loki immediately changed his mind and went to watch the next fight, and the swordsman did the same. Well, Zeus asked the Buddha not to create more unnecessary problems, but he only began to laugh in response, because the only one who can order him is himself. Then Zeus, without further ado, went to watch the next battle. Well, Odin further for some reason sucked life out of plants with his power. Geir, meanwhile, apologized to Brunhild for going too far after Heracles passed away, and they went to the chambers of the next representative of the people. It was Raiden Temimin, the strongest Yokozuna sumo wrestler in human history. However, for Geir, he was the personification of all the 7 sins of mankind, on the basis of which Brunhild woke him up with a cry. In this connection, he flew up and was already about to retire with one of them, but Brunhild stopped him with a blow and offered him her sister, the 3rd Valkyrie Trud, who herself was larger than Temimin in size, for personal pleasures. But it turned out that our great sumo wrestler is crazy about big girls, from which even the harsh labor turned into a sweet girl. And as a result, she fell in love with him, and they were united by souls. After that, we were immediately transferred to the arena, which was redesigned in the style of the Japanese sumo arena. Heimdall began to introduce the participants of the fight, where the strongest sumo wrestler of all time, Raiden Temimin, who we already know will act for people, and for the gods will be the familiar Indian supreme god, Shiva. This fight will be watched by all the strongest sumo wrestlers, and from Shiva's side, his 3 wives and half-elephant son Ganesha, who believes that his father will win, will be observers. Meanwhile, at the arena, Shiva said that he would destroy Temimin, but the sumo wrestler, in response, immediately took a handful of salt and after conducting a ritual sumo ceremony, attacked Shiva with a powerful technique, In addition, he delivered several more blows to Shiva's head, and he was about to finish him off with a knee to the head, but Shiva easily stopped his blow and hit back with a good blow to the chest. After that, Temimin stood up and said that now he will show his true strength. But before that, for clarification, we were shown January 1767. At the time, Temimin was 3 years old, and by this time he was still unable to walk, and his parents prayed that the gods would help him get back on his feet. And in the end, Temimin got to his feet. However, it turned out that his muscles were so strong that they broke his bones in his arms, legs, and ribs. And now, in order to change his fate, he began to train other muscles in order to restrain his own muscles with them. In short, a cycle of muscles began in his body, which was called 100 seals. And it turns out that Wayland Labor is a supramuscular sumo-skeletal belt that helps to restrain Temimon's muscles. And it turns out that he became the strongest sumo wrestler despite the fact that he held himself back all his life. In this regard, he began to release his muscles in the arena and asked Trud to restrain them. Roughly speaking, he has taken off his chains and will now fight at full strength. He started attacking Shiva and was even able to put him on the ground. In response to this, Shiva collided with his head, and it turns out that their heads are of the same strength. Then Shiva began to fight off his attacks on an equal footing. However, Temimin caught one of Shiva's hands and damaged it with his power. Now the god could not keep his balance normally. However, Temimin noticed that Shiva's blows only got stronger. After that, they continued to fight on equal terms and enjoyed this fight. And Shiva even remembered the feeling of battle, which he felt for the last time 1,000 years ago. And they began to show us a story about the Indian pantheon, where there were 116 gods who were forever fighting among themselves for power, since in those days there was still no god who was so strong as to rule them all. Also in the same place, somewhere in the dense forests, 2 gods unknown at that time lived. A mischievous Slav, disco dancer Shiva is the god of destruction, and his close friend, always training Rudra, the god of the storm. There their village was attacked by brother gods, bloodthirsty Asuras, which, as a result, our friends destroyed without any problems. During their conversation, Rudra shared his dream that he wants to defeat everyone and climb to the top of India. Shiva, at first, began to laugh at him. However, in the end, he decided to support his friend, and they went to conquer the Indian pantheon. There, day after day, they began to defeat the Indian gods, moving up the pantheon, where they destroyed the strongest gods and took away their names. They eventually made it to the top. However, there Rudra offered Shiva to find out who was the strongest, because it was very important for him. And Shiva filled his eyes with water for the sake of his friend, and they began the most fierce battle in the history of India, where it turned out that Shiva was stronger. However, he tried to succumb to his friend so that his dream would come true. But he read it and gave up himself, because in his opinion, giving in is much worse than losing. In this connection, he gave his body tattoos with the names of the gods to Shiva, and he became the supreme god of India. But Rudra himself left the pantheon, and Shiva never saw his friend again. Then we were returned to the arena, where the same Rudra, along with other strongest Indian gods, was watching the fight between Shiva and Temimin. Here Shiva, without noticing him, decided to use his famous Shiva fighting dance. He began to move at an unrealistic speed, because of which Temimin could not even hit him. And Shiva continued to gain momentum, but Temimin was not even going to give up. In this connection, Shiva warmed up his body and during the attack of Temimin melted part of his face with his blow. And everyone thought that the Sumoist would soon lose, but he only smiled in response, because now he will show Shiva his real true power. But before that, we were shown the past, where little Temimin was called on the street to a yard sumo fight. And he defeated the strongest guy in this village in a second, and everyone started calling Temimin a monster and afraid of him. In this regard, he asked his mother why he was born not like all other children, and she replied that when he was born and could not move, she prayed to the gods every day that he could walk, and the gods seemed to have heard. And that's why Temimin has grown so big and strong, and she is insanely proud of him. Well, he needs to use his own strength to help people, using his skills for the benefit of those who are not as strong as him. And now, following the advice of his mother, Temimin grew up a nice and kind guy. And so he would have been able to live his whole life if at his 17 years old there had not been a powerful volcanic eruption, due to the ashes of which the crop was destroyed. and famine began in his hometown. And that moment changed his future. In this regard, he decided to leave his home in order to earn a lot of money. And he went on a long journey to get to the Sumo Academy. There, having gone to the first training session, he thought that with his strength he could harm one of the students. But it turned out that strength alone is not enough in sumo. The one whose martial art is more developed wins there. And strength is already a powerful bonus to this. In this connection, having trained well, he threw his opponent out of the arena in the first official fight. After that, over and over again, with just one blow, he defeated his opponents and therefore became a real sumo legend. He also made a lot of money by sending it to his hometown to end the famine. And the trace of his glory began to warm all of Japan. But this holiday did not last long, because one day, seeing fear in the eyes of his opponent, he remembered the words of his mother and deliberately lost the fight to him. Then he remembered that feeling when the weak are afraid of him in the same way as it was in childhood. And since then, in order not to cripple his rivals and not harm those who are weaker, Tniemann stopped using his best techniques. And so there were 4 forbidden receptions. However, despite all this, he continued to defeat his opponents and send winnings to his hometown. And even holding back his strength, he had 96% of victories, where he himself voluntarily gave 4% of the defeat. And as a result, he ended his career without having fought with anyone at full strength. Based on what in the present, he decided to throw off all the existing shackles and use one of the techniques forbidden to himself. He began to perform the introductory ritual of Raiden and decided to use a death blow with the palm of his hand, where, having gathered all his strength, he was able to exceed the speed of sound with this blow and pierce Shiva, injuring 2 of his hands. But Shiva then rose to his feet again. It also turned out that after this blow, due to the recoil, Tniemann's muscles began to massively explode. In this connection, he asked Trud to help him so that he finished off Shiva with the last final blow. But Trud, out of love for him, tried to dissuade him, because after all this, his organs would be destroyed. But Tniemann said that he was ready to give his life for the sake of victory, because he is a real sumo fighter. And Trud, calling him a fool, agreed to help him, because once she told Gear that for the sake of her beloved man, she was even ready to give her life. Because of this, Tniemann turned on his strength to 100%. While Shiva, seeing his old friend Rudra, also decided to use all his strength, as he realized that now 1116 Indian gods believe in him, and he decided to go beyond his limits. He literally touched his heart and began to disperse it. According to legend, this technique is called Doomsday. In this connection, Shiva began to be covered with fire. He is going to dance a powerful dance until they burn to the ground, and Shiva creates a new world from the ashes. They attacked each other with their strongest attacks, and their bodies literally started to burn. Well, Brunhild explained to us that the longer this fight goes on, the less muscle Tniemann will have. With Shiva, the situation is approximately the same, because he gradually begins to burn himself, and now it's counting down to the minutes. After that, they decided to put all their strength into the last blow. Tniemann attacked, but Shiva injured his hand with his blow. But he remained on his feet. However, he realized that he had already lost, and he asked Trud to turn back and not go out of life with him. But she refused to leave the guy she fell in love with. Well, Shiva, with the next blow, injured Tniemann's head, and he also thanked his opponent for the fact that they were able to carry out this greatest fight in history. And in the end, Shiva won. Well, the sumo wrestlers decided to carry out their greatest legend of Tniemann with a sumo stomp, and the bodies of Tniemann and Trud disintegrated. Then Shiva, leaving the arena, met his old friend and the rest of the gods. Zeus also appeared there, and Shiva, unexpectedly for everyone, said that it turns out that people are amazing. Zeus also agreed with him, because people are not so easy to defeat. Then we were shown Brunhild and Gear, who remembered their conversation with Trud, and she realized that she left life happy. But Brunhild was in the maximum fury because of the loss and the death of her sister. And she also made an altar for the deceased Tniemann next to other dead fighters. Next, we were shown the meeting of Zeus and Buddha, who was enjoying the sun under a tree. And there Zeus wanted to treat himself to what the Buddha eats, but he did not give him the bars and ate them all at once. It turned out that Zeus came to him to ask the Buddha to enter the arena in the 6th duel. Well, the Buddha immediately clarified whether Zeus really wants to destroy people, and he replied that yes, because he does not like to lose. The Buddha said that he does not condemn this, and he likes Zeus' excitement, and he agreed to enter the arena. And in parallel with this, we were shown Gear, who came to the infirmary to look for bandages for Brunhild. And there she accidentally overheard the conversation of the 7 gods of happiness, who were bandaging themselves after being humiliated by the Buddha. And Gear was noticed there when she was eavesdropping. In this connection, the 7 began to ask why she was here, but she was saved by the appearance of Jack the Ripper. Meanwhile, the Buddha entered the arena for the 6th duel. Heimdall presented him as a representative of the gods, but the Buddha took the mouthpiece from him and, unexpectedly for everyone, said that he would fight not for the gods, but for humanity. Then everyone was shocked. He also added that if the gods do not want to save humanity, then he will save them himself. Heimdall informs the Buddha that he cannot fight for humanity because he breaks the rules. However, Zeus intervenes in the conversation, who allows the Buddha to stand against the gods, referring to the rules of Ragnarok. Odin asks the Buddha if he is ready to become enemies for all the gods. However, the Buddha does not care, because he never hated the gods and admires only himself. Buddha asks Zeus who will be his opponent. Then rays of light appeared in the sky, and then a ship descended to the earth. 7 gods of happiness enter the arena from it, but Heimdall warns them that only one can fight. Their leader Valshravana says that they are one. When he removes his armor, his team begins to inhabit him, creating a powerful beam of light around him. All the rays are combined into one sphere, from the fragments of which appears the opponent of the Buddha, the god of misfortune Zero-Fuku. He immediately says that he wants to destroy the Buddha, and therefore begins to warm up, because he has not been on Earth for hundreds of years. He forms an axe from his body to prepare for battle. Gear tells Brunhild that merging all 7 gods is not fair, but it turns out that the 7 lucky gods were just a temporary form, and Zero-Fuku is their true form of existence. Brunhild explains that Zero-Fuku was once a kind god who wanted to spread happiness, but ended up being changed due to grief. We are told the story of Zero-Fuku when he was still a teenager. Every day he tried to make the world a better place and did good deeds, and this day was no exception. He saw a little chick that had fallen out of the nest and helped him get back home. Then Zero-Fuku lay on the ground and felt happy from what helps this world. One day he descended from heaven to earth, and a terrible sight was revealed to him. People suffered from unknown diseases and were unhappy. Then Zero-Fuku realized that in order to bring happiness to people, he must remove the source of unhappiness. He approached the boy and stretched out his hand over him to take his misfortune for himself. The boy immediately felt better and even began to run for happiness. People began to worship him, deifying him, and then Zero-Fuku realized that he could help all these people simply by absorbing their misfortunes. After a few years, he absorbed a lot of misfortune that he himself began to suffer from it. He returns to the city, wanting to see how people are doing now. However, they reveal the whole human essence. The less misfortunes people had, the more they began to forget about the true meaning of happiness, starting to succumb to sins. He is accidentally hit by the guy's shoulder, causing Zero-Fuku to fall to the ground. Then he recognized in this man the boy whom he helped many years ago. Zero-Fuku decides to ask how he's doing, but he doesn't even remember him and tells him to leave. This shocks Zero-Fuku, as he saved people from all the troubles, but they never became happy, but rather became even more unhappy. At this moment, the Buddha passes with his disciples. Even though the people behind the Buddha looked miserable and poor, Zero-Fuku saw the happiness on their faces, unlike the people in the city. Zero-Fuku asks the Buddha why people with the Buddha look happier than the people he helped by absorbing their misfortunes. The Buddha invites him to join them in order to achieve enlightenment and says that happiness cannot be conveyed. You need to achieve it yourself, also supplementing this with the fact that where there is light, there is darkness. This shocked Zero-Fuku, and he ran away with tears in his eyes, jealous of the Buddha, because he saw that a person was able to make people around him happy, despite the fact that this was Zero-Fuku's life mission. He cries by the river, and negative energy hovers around him, which entered his soul, and now his love of making people happy has become hatred, and he has become the very Zero-Fuku who hates happiness. Several people see him in the forest and start running away as they saw the monster. He is going to destroy the child, but the mother began to protect him by covering him with her hands. This put Zero-Fuku into a stupor, and he began to resist the desire to destroy humanity, and therefore divided himself into 7 gods of happiness. Meanwhile, Zirofuku decides to get even with Buddha, but he attacks first, knocking him down. The Buddha calls on Zirofuku to fight on as the fight is just beginning. Zirofuku then attacks with his axe, but Buddha easily dodges his attacks thanks to his eye feature. Zirofuku unleashes more and more attacks, but Buddha dodges every one without any problem. This makes Zirofuku sad, and his axe begins to grow larger. Then Zeus explained that the axe absorbs misfortune, and the more Zirofuku experiences misfortune, the larger the axe becomes and the greater its destructive power. The axe gets bigger and Zirofuku continues to miss, because every time he misses it is a misfortune for him, and the longer the fight drags on, the worse it is for the Buddha. Gear is surprised by the Buddha's reflexes, but Brunhild reveals his ability to dodge so deftly. It's in his eyes. They give him the ability to foresee the future. Zirofuku keeps missing and asks the Buddha why he only dodges his attacks. At this moment, the Buddha counterattacks Zirofuku, saying that he is his own master. The Buddha continues to attack him, and it seemed that the victory was already on the side of the Buddha. But Zirofuku remembers his past failures, and this makes him more unhappy. Then he releases all his power, and the axe absorbs all his misfortune, and becomes very huge. Zirofuku swings this axe at the Buddha, but he can only accept this desperation and activate his staff. The axe seemed to destroy the Buddha, but he was protected by a shield that transformed from a staff. Brunhild explains that the Staff of the Six Worlds is a divine treasure that contains the powers of the six Buddhist guardians, and it changes shape depending on the emotions of the Buddha. Buddha throws the axe back, and Zirofuku turns it into a sword. Then the Buddha uses the second form of the Six Worlds and turns the staff into a club. Zirofuku decides to attack Buddha, but he dodges and retaliates, knocking Zirofuku down. Then we are told the story of the Buddha. People called him Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a prince of the Shakya clan in ancient northern India. From birth, he wanted nothing and had everything: the best clothes, the best food, the best housing, the best education. One evening, his father tells him about his destiny to become the king of the whole world. He feeds the poor people, saying that it is the duty of the royal family to bring people happiness. One day, he notices a flying free bird that has no obligations to anyone, but he is suddenly destroyed by another bird. At that moment, his ideas about his purpose were shaken. He comes to visit his distant cousin Jataka. They began to discuss Siddhartha's destiny to become the king of the whole world. Siddhartha thinks Jataka is happy as his kingdom is prosperous. However, Jataka believes that he was unlucky, as he is seriously ill and all his life he took care of the people of his kingdom. But he himself never saw this world. The next day, Jataka leaves for another world, and the whole kingdom mourns this loss, thinking that he lived his happy life. But only Siddhartha knew that this was not so. At that moment, he gets off his horse and starts laughing out loud, saying that he has achieved enlightenment. Siddhartha comes to the funeral, where he scatters flower petals everywhere. He takes the body of the Jataka, and this causes condemnation from the people. But Siddhartha does not care, because he knows that the Jataka does not need prayers, because happiness is inside him. Siddhartha leaves his body in the river and sends Jataka to explore the beauties of this world. This forever changed his outlook on life, and he goes far from civilization, leaving everything he had. He finds a group of people who crave enlightenment by depriving themselves of food. Siddhartha gives one of them food, which is why he was condemned by their leader, but Siddhartha just wants to feed him. Then the group starts to follow him, and he teaches them to rest and relax. One evening, people sacrifice a woman to the gods, but Siddhartha intervenes and saves the woman. Believers threaten him with the wrath of a god, but he would gladly fight the gods. Brunhild explains that the Buddha despises anyone who denies their inner happiness or imposes the concept of fate on others, and it is for this reason that he opposes the gods. Zirofuku continues to attack Buddha, but also fails to hit him. This causes him to change the shape of his weapon, splitting it into two swords. The Buddha decided to fight on equal terms and change weapons, and therefore turned his staff into the shape of a sword. They exchange attacks, and it seems that their strength is equal, but the Buddha still has a slight advantage due to the eyes. Buddha injures Zirofuku, and this angers him even more, so he turns the weapon into many blades. He attacks Buddha with them, but he turned his staff into a sword that is able to withstand these blades and destroy them. The Buddha shortens Zirofuku's weapon, and they came face to face. People supported the Buddha, which annoyed Zirofuku as no one paid attention to him like many years ago. Enraged, he extends his axe and nearly hits the Buddha. In response, the Buddha tells him to learn to love himself. However, Zirofuku considers this nonsense and continues to attack the opponent. Buddha defends himself by saying that he likes Zirofuku. This shocked Zirofuku, as he was the only one who told him this. He thinks that the Buddha is lying, but looking at his sincerely joyful face, he realized that he wanted to be like the Buddha that everyone loves. Gradually, his weapons begin to disappear, and the Buddha discards his staff because he wants to fight on equal terms. They begin to exchange blows, and Zirofuku realizes that the Buddha is the only one who understands him. And therefore, when the Buddha knocks out Zirofuku, he feels the happiest in this world. People support the Buddha, and the negative energy leaves Zirofuku, making him the very teenager who wants to make this world happy. However, his demonic horns are attracted to him and hurt him. From his body, 2 dragons fly out and surround Zirofuku and create a sphere around him. A huge demon emerges from the orb, which causes the Buddha to jump aside, as he was unable to predict his next actions. Buddha asks the demon where Zirofuku is, but he replies that he is no more, and he himself is the lord of the demonic world, and his name is Papias. Papias himself does not know why he is in this world, but he really wants to test what his body is capable of. Ares asks the gods who this Papias is. However, no one knows or heard anything about him. At this moment, Hades arrives, who says that Papias is a legendary berserker from the underworld, where demons live. And even though Hades is the king of the underworld, he had never seen Papias before and thought they were just fairy tales. Papias starts to attack the Buddha, but he was able to defend himself. Then Papias unleashed a flurry of attacks on him, and the Buddha continued to defend himself. However, Brunhild explains that the Buddha cannot predict the opponent's movements, as he only sees the flicker of the soul. When someone wants to do something, his soul starts to move before the body. The Buddha is able to see this radiance of the soul, and that is why he can predict the future. Since there is not a drop of light in Papias, he cannot see it. Papias is surprised that the Buddha has defended himself against all of his attacks, so he decides to fight at full strength. Then Papias turns his hand into a huge drill and attacks the Buddha. But the Buddha at the last moment managed to turn his staff into a shield, but this did not help him either, as the drill penetrates the shield and damages the left eye of the Buddha. Papias is shocked that the Buddha managed to dodge his attack as he was aiming for the head. He then turns his hand into an axe and proceeds to quickly attack him, further damaging the Buddha. Ares is surprised how strong Papias is. Hades, on the other hand, says that an ordinary god cannot be compared with the power of Papias, because he is a real monster who once destroyed half of the underworld. In fact, the second half of hell was just lucky, because he made a real havoc in hell, but suddenly disappeared. This happened hundreds of years before Hades became the ruler of the underworld. He suggested why Papias is in the arena. Someone had obtained a tiny fragment of this great demon, who created its seed to then plant it on the god, which turned out to be Zirofuku. Ares asks who is capable of this, but Hades has already guessed who likes such madness. This was done by the god Beelzebub, who is just interested to see what happens, and anyone could be the carrier of the demon. Meanwhile, the fight continues in the arena, where Papias was able to injure the Buddha's leg. The Buddha already has a lot of damage, which affects his well-being. He calls for Zirofuku, as he believes that he is sitting in the depths of Papias' soul. However, Papias only laughs in response, saying that he has already eaten Zirofuku and digested it. This infuriates the Buddha, and for the first time in many centuries he felt hatred, and therefore threatens to destroy Papias, and his staff turns into a scythe with a lion's head. Papias is surprised that an ordinary god would challenge such a higher being as he is, and therefore he gladly accepts the challenge. Buddha decides to attack him, but Papias easily blocks the blow. Then he finally wants to destroy Papias, and therefore uses a powerful technique, and his staff began to spew fire, which gives acceleration to the staff. However, Papias blocks the blow with his hand and damages the Buddha. Papias asks for his last words, but the Buddha only comes closer and says that it is he who will save humanity. Then Papias pushes him away with his foot, and the Buddha is seriously injured, but is not going to give up. The Buddha felt the fear of Papalias, but he only denies this, saying that he is a higher being who has surpassed his former self in strength, since his body could not contain all the power. Now he has a powerful body and wonders why he should be afraid of a pitiful god. The Buddha calls him weak, even weaker than Zero Fuku. This infuriates Papalias, and he unleashes a flurry of attacks on him as if spewing flames, and the enlightened Buddha absorbs this hellish flame. Ares already thinks that Buddha is finished, but Hades calls him a fool, because in the eyes of the Buddha there is no hint that he wants to give up. Zeus adds that the Buddha is waiting for a certain moment to change the course of the battle. Papalias pushes the Buddha away, but he remains on his feet, which angers Papias even more. The Buddha asks the opponent to continue in the same vein, which causes fear in Papias as his hands are trembling. He refuses to believe it, so he injures his hand and turns it into a sword. The Buddha then decides to attack, but Papalias defends himself and breaks the Buddha's scythe. This causes the staff to revert to its true form, and Papalias immediately attacks the Buddha, causing the staff to be destroyed. It seemed that the end of the Buddha had already come, and Papalias was going to destroy him. But at that moment the Buddha sees a vision where the luminous ball is behind him. He decides to touch him, but someone's hand grabs him, causing the Buddha to come to his senses. He starts laughing out loud, and Papalias thinks he's gone crazy. The Buddha says that he has overcome his immaturity, which causes his scrunchie to break, and he stands up in a new form. He takes the weapon to Zero Fuku, urging him to fight alongside him. When he activates his new weapon, he begins to absorb the love of the Buddha instead of misfortune, turning it into a divine treasure. This weapon is shaped like a sword and has the power of the 7 gods of happiness. The Buddha continues to fight with Papalias, and now their powers are equal. However, people begin to support the Buddha, which gives even more power, as his new sword absorbs love. Papias, on the other hand, wonders how the Buddha continues to fight, because recently he lay already exhausted. Kojiro believes Buddha has a chance to win, as he is blind in one eye and has multiple injuries. Papalias decides to use his powerful technique, but Buddha manages to defend himself by inflicting even more damage on him. However, the Buddha was able to parry the attack and deliver a counterpunch that deals the first damage to Papalias. Papalias believes that it was impossible to repel his most powerful technique, which causes even more anger, and he continues to bombard the Buddha with a flurry of attacks. The gods say that the Buddha can no longer withstand another powerful attack, but Hades says that he only needs to dodge. The Buddha, on the other hand, begins to see a small light in his soul due to fear, and therefore evades attacks. This upsets Papalias, and he decides to end the fight, and therefore cuts the Buddha in half. This shocked everyone, and Papalias was already beginning to rejoice, but the body of the Buddha suddenly disappears, and he appears behind him. He strikes a decisive blow that gives victory to humanity. People are celebrating the victory, but Papalias cannot accept defeat, and therefore, with his last strength, attacks the Buddha. However, he does not have time to do this, as his soul evaporated. At this moment, he notices Zero Fuku, who happily goes to the 7 gods of happiness, and together they fly away to Valhalla. Buddha cries of happiness, calling Zero Fuku cool. Thus, the Buddha is the winner of the battle and compares the score with the gods 3-3. Brunhild and Geir approach him to congratulate him on his victory, but he suddenly falls to the ground due to his injuries. Medical help comes to him, and he tells Brunhild not to be serious about her goals. The gods see that the score is getting even, and therefore Zeus says that they need to win the next fight by all means. Then Hades decides to fight in the next battle to avenge his brother Poseidon. This news shocks all the gods, as well as Geir, who does not know a person who can defeat Hades. However, Brunhild already knows who will fight the Lord of the Underworld. This man is the first king of mankind, and it is he who will be able to resist Hades. If you want to continue, then write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell so as not to miss new videos. Animap was with you. Bye everyone.